Hello, friends and enemies. Here's something that's been sloshing around my head recently, and it's the idea that tomboys are permissible, but femboys are visceral. Meaning, societally, we tend to have visceral disgust reactions unless you are deviant to men who are feminized. And of course, the very term deviant, we are expressing that they are not the majority, that they are a deviation from the normal behavior. So, just wanted to make that clear. Tomboys, on the other hand, seem almost permissible. In fact, some men fall in love with the idea of a tomboy, a woman who can relate to him on a different level than most girls. Yet, these are both things that in the modern sense we view as bordering on transgenderism, but not quite. I must first emphasize that because there is a general masculine nature of a woman does not mean she has ever, once in her life, felt true gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is a very distinct clinical term of true disillusionment with your form. In women, it is quite rare for true dysphoria. In men, it is also quite rare with the exception of autogynephilia. The vast majority of male to female transgenderism is actually better described as this paraphilic category, whereas the male derives sexual pleasure from imagining himself as a woman. This is not true dysphoria, as it is sexual in nature, and the men who are on agonophilia trans are those who still are attracted to women post-transition. I am unsure if this is scientifically vindicated, but this is a pattern you will notice. True, quote-unquote, dysphoric men will be homosexuals. As previously highlighted, being a dysphoric male/female is not the same as a femboy versus a tomboy. But why are we so chill with tomboys, generally speaking, but dislike femboys? At least those of us with disgust sensitivity. Firstly, the mere fact that we feel disgust when looking at a femboy shows us semblances of profound sociological truths. There is something perverted and wrong about a male in that form, something we can't quite pinpoint, but we don't like. Perhaps this tells us something about masculinity. Perhaps the most damaging thing that could happen in society is a shift away from masculinity, a perversion of it. Maybe this is what that visceral disgust is telling us. To spit in the face of your form is something we perceive as wrong, or even dangerous. Perhaps femininity is the perverse. This might sound foolish, but the masculine and feminine are complements of each other. Unchecked masculinity is dangerous, but perhaps unchecked femininity is even more so, or more so the abandonment of masculinity, for the abandonment of femininity seems far less perverse. We use words like, quote, culturally stigmatized instead of perverse, but these are the same, and I do not care to be politically correct. I care to use descriptive language that can properly illustrate what I'm saying. These are only quantifiable by our gut instinct. And many of us will admit we have this gut instinct, although it is quite unpopular to admit such. But we can see this interplay when we look at societal reaction. These thoughts are convoluted, but I believe this dynamic can speak to something unspoken. The true value of masculinity. These mechanisms operating far below moral reasoning, but yet it is the egg out of which moral reasoning hatches. This is important. The necessity of stable masculine order to be put on the highest level for societal flourishing. These feminine men serve as an encapsulation of what we despise as a society. People in favor of the expression of the soul argue that they are not hurting anyone. But then why, do we disgust them so? For their behavior is antagonistic to our evolutionary history. There is no other reason for our inherent disgust. And this, my friend, is an abandoned sensation that we are forced to try to rationalize and suppress, but perhaps our suppression leads us to an abyss of damaging behavior that we used to suppress, but now we adore. I want to vaguely give a background on that oh-so-familiar feeling of disgust. When you find yourself on a date with a woman and she promptly exclaims that she has slept with over 50 men, what do you feel? It is more than likely to be disgust. Pathogens used to be our greatest threat to our survival, and this innate disgust sensitivity has been our shield. Women who are more promiscuous are more likely generally to carry pathogens, and thousands of years ago that would have been devastating. Those who have more disgust sensitivity are more likely to pass down their genetics, of course, because they can avoid those pathogens. Thus, the cycle begins. I do believe that lesbianism in the modern sense never existed, but that female bisexuality has both been common and somewhat permissive. In certain contexts, with certain degrees. Female friendships are far more intimate than men. Female are also highly competitive, hypergamous, and branch swingers. We see a higher branch and we swing to it to try to secure security for our offspring and ourselves. You put women in male-dominated spaces and they will subconsciously tear each other down. Men simply operate different, and I think men operate more overtly. Very intense, close female relationships were conducive to survival. Of course, this is generally why we also see women sleeping with each other less viscerally gross than homosexual men. I think there is something also to this. Perhaps close female relationships sometimes, but rarely expressed in more intimate ways, bolster co-parenting and female relationships in a way that could almost break the intense competitive nature of women, or at least provide a different coddling dynamic of trust and true intimacy. I haven't contemplated enough to draw immersive and declarative conclusions, but I do believe that there is something to this, and the older I get, and more I learn, perhaps I can fill in the gaps and formulate distinct names and rationale for each of these evolutionary dynamics. Or maybe someone already has. I don't know where to find information about this, but women on some level are bisexual. This is a fact. Trust. But that does not tackle the concept that we are often disgusted by male homosexuality. It's not that we hate them or that we fear them. It's that they are simply disgusted. This is the most poignant example around male homosexuality, just like FEMBOYS. But why? Well, the most obvious is that homosexual sex is extremely conducive to pathogen spread. Gay men sleep with lots of other gay men, and you think about it, they are a small minority of the population exclusively sleeping with each other. And this is to extreme degrees. They also practiced anal sex, causing micro tears to the anus and an exchange of blood and poop and all the things that are conducive for the mutation of some nasty bugs. One can simply gander at monkeypox and AIDS, most recent prime examples of homosexual glory. Often we feel disgust and attribute a quantitative moral value. For example, Christianity in the Middle Ages was among the most intense pathogen danger times, so both men and women's sexual promiscuity was viewed as one of the most mortal of sins. The beauty and purity of the virgin was put on the highest pedestal, and premarital sex was spitting in the face of God. These behaviors are less selected simply because of modern medicine, but our thousands of years of pathogen avoidance and thus our evolutionary knee-jerk reactions do not simply disappear because the threat is gone or mitigated. We still look at people like Bonnie Blue with disgust and view her as an immoral person. She is a violation, but is it a violation of moral code, or is it more so a behavior of danger for the group? Is she a dangerous woman? Her disconnection from her actions or perverted joy from them riddle people. What spawn of Satan is this woman? But the real question is, how does she rationalize her behavior? I'm clearly analyzing this without any ontological justification to a supreme being for my moral declarations. I would say I have tried to avoid moral language and instead try to understand our knee-jerk reactions, like what is ingrained in us surrounding these behavior. This also describes the other side of the picture, people like Bonnie Blue who do not have disgust sensitivity. These people, throughout all of history, were selected against. To not have this pathogen avoidance behaviors used to lead us to death. Pathogens were the number one killer, after all. Moral code followed, a necessity for societal functioning, to encapsulate all, to give them a very specific framework to operate within that is conducive to societal functioning, that is, of course, based on the principles of this disgust sensitivity, which, of course, not everyone has, so having some extra societal moral framework that everyone has to abide to, or they are killed, or imprisoned, or, thrown away from the group, was necessary. And always has been necessary, and still is necessary, for the most part. Anyway, modern politics seems to be, and a hope to not be overly reductive, a moral argument between those with disgust and those without. Those with more primordially ingrained views such as tribal behavior and in-group preference, and those without. I will say that we get into dangerous territory. We are stepping far too outside our evolutionary norm and thus finding ourselves walking on a tightrope, teetering with each step, grasping for the straws of our morality. We want things to make sense. We want to pace ourselves beyond our innate moral qualms, but yet the rope is too thin. We will fall, finding everything crumbling below us as we blame it on the abandonment of insert blank, Christianity, family values, kids having less screen time. Above morality, it is our own humanity. It is our own innate disgust that guide us above all else. As we try to walk away from it, we find ourselves wrapped in a bungee cord, always trying to bounce back. We can't escape something so primordial, something so ingrained. And I truly, truly believe that our current cognitive drift as a society is a ditzy dance into an alienated world. So our permissiveness of the tomboy and our visceralness of the femboy leads insight into our own values and necessities. But what do I know? This is just what I've seen so far in the world in my short life. I could be entirely wrong, but more than likely there is a grain of truth in my rationalizations that I will be able to hone as I grow older and wiser. So that is a bit of a ramble, and maybe I'm absolutely batshit crazy and you have no idea what I'm talking about. That is likely, that is appreciated, and that is fine. Just let me know your general thoughts. I just want to be clear that this is simply, I seek to have an analytical view on this. I'm not designating any moral values, good, bad, or ugly. More so, I think that this is the ugly, that this is the disgust, and that's what I speak of, not necessarily, like I said, moral attributes. So please don't group me like that. Thank you.